Good evening, everybody. It's Mario with Motorcycle Knuckle Busters, and we're back at it again. Another great guest, my producer Cody, and he's just knocking it out of the park. He's got us a wonderful guest this evening, and I'm looking forward to this. I think, as far as the guests that we've had on here, we've had some wonderful people. Proud of the people we brought on, but this gentleman really brings a lot of knowledge, a lot of insight into our world, and he's really gonna. I hope he's gonna fill in some blanks for us and everything else. Tell us a little about himself. But just as Herodotus was the great historian of the ancient world, or Stephen Ambrose with American history and everything, this gentleman here is the historian for the motorcycle world. And so, without further ado, I want to introduce Paul DeOrleans.
Hey, it's nice to meet you, Mario.
It's nice to meet you. I'm like trying to get tongue-tied here. I don't know why I'm doing that.
It's all right. It happens to the best of us sometimes.
It does. I'm just trying to push too many thoughts out at one time. And it's my mouth can't keep up. That's my issue there.
Well, I like the introduction, but yeah, I guess you would say that my specialty has really been the whole of motorcycling. It's like I know a lot of people who know way more than me about particular subjects. Like anybody who's ever restored X, Y, or Z knows more about that bike than I do. But
absolutely,
I've just made it a point to, and it's been just my interest to really kind of examine everything from was the first motorcycle in 1816 or 1867? And I'm also looking at, what's happening with electric motorcycles today. So everything in between. I think my bent has really been more about culture, although, I've owned about 300 motorcycles. So obviously I'm a total gearhead too. Yeah, it's been my great joy to be able to dive into this universe and kind of share what I find with people.
Now, you were born in Stockton, California?
I sure was.
Okay.
What a claim to fame, I think it still is #1 murder capital in the United States per capita. It was a pretty rough town. I left as soon as I could, and that was actually how I started motorcycling. I wanted to take night classes to graduate a year early from high school because I hated high school. Super violent. There were gang fights the beginning of every semester, and I was beat up and I had guns pointed at me. It's like, get me out of here.
So it was that way back then. I mean, I know it is now.
Oh, yeah.
We've actually
well, people forget how gnarly the 70s were. Look at pictures of New York City in the 70s. Stockton was pretty rough. So I used a motorcycle to take night classes at the local community college and graduated a year early, and got me out of high school and into college. And I never looked back, and started collecting motorcycles right after college. Got really deep in, and also never looked back. Just kind of, even though I had a career as a decorative painter and a muralist, I was intensively collecting motorcycles from like the mid 80s onwards because they were cheap. Not many people wanted them, and the bikes that I was really interested, very few people even knew about. So it's too bad I wasn't into Crockers back then, but I was into Bruff Superiors.
No kidding.
But I was into Bruff Superiors, and those have gotten pretty expensive too. So I still have one.
The Superiors. I've always T.S. Lawrence. I've always been a fan. And unfortunately, he lost his life on one, but that was his bike of choice, of course.
Yeah. I've ridden actually 2 across country on motorcycle cannonballs. In 2018, I rode a 1925 SS100, and in 2014, I rode a 1933 1150 flathead, and the bike ran perfectly. I rode it 2 up. My girlfriend was on the back, and I partnered with Revival Cycles on that one, and they maintained the bike beautifully. And I think after that ride, the price of those bikes doubled. They were kind of the forgotten model of the Bruff Superior line. And even though they were George Bruff's favorite model towards the end of the production, and we were cruising at like 65, 70 miles an hour all day long on a bike from 1933. And
that's just amazing.
all the guys on, beautifully restored knuckleheads were their jaws were on their gas tanks as we just zipped by them, two up going uphill. They just couldn't keep up. And so, yeah, a lot of every cannonball has like 300 or 400 of the most intense early motorcycle collectors from the United States and around the world. And everybody immediately, I think, started looking for an 1150, and the prices doubled.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I know, you and I, I've been around a number of events. You always go, you're at Mecum every year. You also go to Bonhams, you're an advisor to both of those, aren't you?
Yeah, I haven't been an advisor to Bonhams for a few years, but Mecum, yeah, I still I do their TV broadcasts every year in Las Vegas, and that's fun. I started out doing color commentary for Ron Christensen at Mid America back in, I think it was 2009. He did a Monterey auction during Pebble Beach Week, and he asked me if I would be interested in doing color commentary, and talk about being thrown into the pool. I mean, what's the job description? Sit there on a stage all day for 2 days and talk about 500 motorcycles as they come across the stage. I'm like, oh my God. So it was fantastic practice, and I quickly overcame any sort of nervousness because I was talking about motorcycles. Kind of bottom line is like, is there a better job? No, it's pretty awesome.
But yeah, that's wonderful. I know. Speaking, going to Mecum, there at South Point, the guys like to all get together at the bar across from the steakhouse. They got the little area they congregate. And that's quite a place to sit, because you'll sit with some guys that are major collectors. You'll sit with people that are getting into collecting, and then you get the cannonballers there. It's just a great bunch of people there. Tell people that haven't been there. Tell them how you see that, how that's been for you.
I mean, the big Las Vegas auctions. There have been several companies that have joined up. Like RM came one year and lost their shirt, and Bonhams was there for years and they lost their shirt. But Mecum has really figured it out, and they actually do very well in Las Vegas. So, but basically, it's like the biggest low-cost museum experience you could have. I mean, 1,500 motorcycles of all varieties. I mean, American, European, Japanese. The oldest are usually turn of the 20th century up to fairly modern bikes. And, I mean, it's just, there's nowhere you can go to look and touch and, sniff and, I mean, you can just crawl around on these things because they're all for sale. And even if you have no intention of buying, I mean, there's no better place to just be exposed to such a collection of old bikes. It's really fun. And of course, people from all over the world come, thousands.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, it's become a convention of sorts. I've often thought it'd be a great place to have seminars and things like that. And actually, they've tried that in the past, but it's been tough to kind of have any consistency around that, which is too bad. There should be more parties. There should be more seminars, but it's hard enough even to get the cannonballers together for a dinner once a year. Because motorcyclists are like cats, man. Can't hurt them.
Well, we have a party. We did we did it with this past year. We did a party again. So I mean, we had some good people. We had like Kiwi Mike was there, and Jill Parham and Marilyn Stout and different people. So we had a nice little gathering stuff. So if you're looking for a party, I'm extending you a invite already. So you got a January invite to come out for that party. So we do it in Henderson. It's not that far from the auction. Yeah. So you were talking about the fact, it's like, hey, I know this, I know the industry, I know the culture, and all that stuff. But there's people that know bikes better than me, the restorers. And I want to tie that into what I see, a personal experience at Mecum. I love when you can be at Mecum, and especially down the paddock area, and you can tell the restorers, because they're the guys that got the camera out, they've got their notebook out. And you know that they're looking at this bike because they can't go see it anywhere else and they can't get up close and personal. And they've made that pilgrimage there just to be able to look over that bike and maybe talk to the owner of that bike to find more details because they got one they're restoring.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially the original paint machines that show up, you know, they become like the reference for a restorer because it's kind of hard to argue with an original paint motorcycle, you know, from 1912 or something. You know, they're remarkable and they come up every year. It's amazing, you know, and these are just little time capsules of history. And even if they're in, you know, kind of rough or heavily patented condition, that's still a ton of information. What type of nuts and bolts, what type of washers did they use? You know, what was the plating on these fittings? You know, was there a little clip there or not? You know, it's like when you're restoring a motorcycle, there's a million details and what a reference, you know, these bikes can be.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's kind of fun is you talk about culture, and this probably appeals to you, is that how you can see the industry change immediately, and you can base it on what you see happening at Miko. You know, like all of a sudden you walk in and the smaller CC Japanese bikes are hot as hell.
Right.
And they were a couple of years ago. They were doing crazy numbers.
Crazy numbers. $50,000 for a Christmas edition Z50 Honda monkey bike. I mean, crazy in a crate. Crazy numbers.
Well, there was the pair in the crate a couple of years ago. Those brought a big money.
Yeah. No, I find it fascinating, and I've actually kept track of top auction prices for many, many years. I have on the Vintageant.com, I have the top 100 most expensive motorcycles, and they're all bikes from auction, because auctions are the only place that you actually have some guarantee that those prices were actually paid. There have been 2 instances that I could cite right now where a press release was put out, and in fact the price was not paid. One was a Winchester motorcycle, like from the Winchester Gun Company, believe it or not. They were made under license here in San Francisco, Winchester motorcycles, and one supposedly sold for $300,000. And I actually ran into the owner of the bike. He showed up at the Quail one year, and I said, "Hey man, how much did you pay for that bike?" He said, "Oh, you know, I made a deal with the guy. It was about $100,000. I said, "Yeah, but that's not what the press release said." He said, and he got all embarrassed, and it's like, oops. And the other one was the Captain American bike that that was one of the 2 that Dan Haggerty certified under oath were real. And, you know, the auction house in LA that had it for sale put out a press release that it sold for $1.64 million, and it did not sell at that auction. It sold privately later to, believe it or not, Paul Allen of Microsoft, who's now died. But I found out where it was going because a really good friend of mine does all the fine art crating for the museums in California. Like, he crates up giant Anselm Kiefer paintings and little tiny sculptures. He's amazing. He can do hydraulic lifts and inside crates so that they'll fit through big diagonal windows that aren't tall enough for a big painting. Anyway, he said, "Hey, Paul, I'm crating up this very unusual motorcycle, and I think you know what it is." And I was like, "Oh," he says, where is it going?" He says, it's going to Seattle. Like, I know exactly who's buying that bike. So it was kind of hush hush, but now that Paul has passed on, I think we can safely say that the Captain America bike is still up in Seattle, and probably in escrow or in some kind of, like, you know, whatever happened to all his stuff, his museum and all his collections. Who knows? Sure. He was a big pop culture ephemera collector.
Speaking of the Captain America bike, I mean, Mr. Hardy's going into the museum this year, isn't he? Sturgis?
Who is? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Hardy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that whole story is fascinating, and I was really proud to be able to kind of break the backstory on all Captain America and the Easy Rider film, and the fact that, you know, these 2 black guys, Ben Hardy and Cliff Voss, were behind its creation. And I actually became friends with Cliff Voss and was able to really tell that story in my book, the chopper, the real story. And we've actually been continuing to develop the story. He's passed on a few years ago, but we filed a Freedom of Information Act to get his FBI file, which is 498 pages long. And, we found pictures of him with Martin Luther King, and actually a woman showed up at Mecum last year with a bike that she claimed was built by Cliff Voss. That's a replica of his own Captain America bike. Not an exact replica, but I had a couple of long conversations with this woman whose brother had commissioned it from a black builder in LA. I'm like, okay, so tell me more about the story. And everything she told me about this situation was Cliff Voss to a T. So I can't wait to tell that story further once I confirm a few things, because that is the only known extant intact Cliff Voss bike, because all the Easy Rider bikes are gone. And obviously Dan Haggerty was full of shit about his restorations, from the blown up bike. It was just a bunch of bullshit. He may have had some parts, but the bike was blown up by his own admission. The gearbox was melted, the frame was destroyed, the engine was destroyed. So what did you have? It's like, and how did you make two bikes out of that? Anyway.
Exactly. Well, I remember the buzz around that bike. I heard a couple of people talking about it last year. So, the one you're referring to. I'm looking forward to seeing what you discover and get to share with the rest of the world here. So you kind of alluded, you've written a number of books, and before we get into that, I believe I've been told you collect and have a lot of books about motorcycles and motorcycle history. Before all the internet and all this stuff, that's what you had to resort to. How many books do you have in your collection?
Oh boy, probably about 3,000 motorcycle books, and probably about the same linear footage of magazines, old magazines. So yeah, I've been collecting them since they were cheap. And now I got to pay a lot more money for super rare titles, or, I finally got a connection in Japan who's digging up all these great books of Japanese, that you can't even search for on the web, because I don't know kanji, so you can't type in, and they're not translated, so they're all in Japanese. I don't care. I just want pictures, like especially stuff about Bosozoku culture. I'm really fascinated with, this Japanese kind of fringy criminal gang element, super youth oriented. They made these incredible like crosses between cafe racers and choppers, and they just became more and more elaborate over the years. And I'm really intrigued to kind of tell a definitive story of this subculture, because a lot of Westerners really, they've seen the bikes, but they don't really know how deep this whole thing goes. It's fascinating.
Yeah, they turn their nose at it too sometimes, just kind of like they do with, the old time, I shouldn't say the old timers, just the establishment turns its nose at electric motorcycles. And we'll get into that a little bit later.
Exactly. And the traditional chopper guys don't really like the neo choppers, or, whatever. Everybody's, it's like, they're just motorcycles. They're all motorcycles. They're all awesome. That's my opinion.
Right. They're this is the beauty of, to me, motorcycles, be it if it's a cafe racer, if it's a bobber, if it's a chopper, if it's a big bagger. I mean, there's bikes I do or don't prefer, but I can appreciate them. I can appreciate, people who have tilled at this and made something beautiful and unique, because they're making it their own. It's their own twist.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been the same since the beginning of motorcycling. I document the first proper custom motorcycle from like 1907. And I've been, I've done a lot of research for another book for both the chopper. Also, I did this book Ton Up 2 years ago, which documents kind of cafe racer culture, but it goes back, like the earliest examples I cite are from the 20s. And even in the United States, I would call a cut down, which is kind of the earliest kind of recognizable and repeatable American custom style, let's say from the mid 1920s onwards. And I've got photographs documenting Harleys and Indians that have been done in this cut down style. You know, they would ditch the front fender and bob the rear fender and use these special little spotlights instead of the big heavy headlights, and dropped handlebars, and boom. You know, that became the bobber, or the bob job as it was called. And then after the war, the bob job started to get more decorated and chromed out, and people started to, you know, put longer forks on them, and then they became the chopper. But, you know, so I've been really fascinated in how people have modified their bikes over history. So, and it's just a question of making a motorcycle to your taste. You know, do you want more performance? Do you want more style? You know, it's all good. What do you want? And now I'm fascinated. I'm really fascinated with what's happening in India and Turkey and Bali, and, you know, around the world. There's all these, you know, micro scenes that are happening. Actually, the Indonesian scene is enormous.
The Indonesian scene is hot. I mean, some of the stuff coming out of there is incredible. Yeah. And South Africa, that's another place. You know, you're seeing some really cool stuff, you know. And I'm always amazed, you know, especially now some of these people in what, you know, we obviously consider third world countries, their ingenuity, and they're taking, they don't have these fantastic, you know, $50,000 lathes and all this different equipment, yet they're putting out some pretty cool looking bikes with the little bit that they have. You know, talk about old school.
Yeah. It's just proof that, you know, it really is about, at some point, it's just about your skills and your imagination. You know, that's really what shows. I mean, you can use, as you say, like, you can have your CNC made, you know, fat tire chopper that's gleaming and perfect. But, you know, I think a lot of these people working in dirt floor, you know, garages are making bikes that are just as interesting. And especially the wacky stuff that's coming out of Bali. I mean, the Vespa scene there is insane. I mean, they'll like make these frames that are like a living room with 27 wheels and 2 Vespa motors, and they're driving it around on the street. I'm like, what is this madness? I mean, they make choppers look like tame and ordinary. I mean, these are wild motorcycles. I don't even know if they're motorcycles. I don't know what they are, except like brilliant. You know, people are amazing. And they're, you know, they'll put a motor in it, you know, and ride it around. It's like crazy. I love it. In fact, I just sent some of my team, you know, so I do exhibitions at the Peterson Museum. I've done 5 so far. And our current exhibit is celebrating 11 designers who are working with electric bikes. And one of them, the youngest, is 17 years old. He's this kid from Ghana named Samuel Aboagye. And he built these solar powered electric scooters from trash, like literally from junk. And we got to know him, and I've got this nonprofit, the Motorcycle Arts Foundation. And, you know, we told him we really wanted to feature his bikes. He says, yeah, but then I won't have any bikes. It's like, okay, so we basically had to buy these bikes from him so he could make more. But shipping them from Ghana was like $9,000 on DHL. And I said, you know, a ticket to Ghana is $1,500 round trip. So last week we sent 2 guys, Dan Green and Greg Hatton, who's a filmmaker. Dan is a professional motorcycle racer and professional hockey player and all this stuff. And he's been working with us for a while. He's awesome. So they went to freaking Accra, Ghana, to fetch these scooters and make a film of the whole process. So I'm super excited about that, you know, and this kid is exactly what we're talking about. 100% ingenuity, like 17 years old, making kind of wooden solar powered electric scooters that freaking work. They have like Bluetooth speakers, and they've got lights, and they've got, you know, radios. They're amazing.
That is amazing. I can't wait to see that. I love the ingenuity. It's a beautiful thing. You know, necessity breeds it. You know, we Michael Lichter, and obviously you're very familiar with Michael, but you know, we did an interview with Michael. I've known him for a while. I've assisted him with a number of different things through the years. You know, there was a picture we popped up when we did an interview with him, and it was a picture he took of this dusty little workshop, and it was a guy in Cuba. And he said, the guy can make anything. He can create anything because, he's dealt, talk about necessity. I mean, there's just no opportunity for parts and things that are needed, so they've got these old bikes running around. They can't get anything. They got to make everything, and I love what that, the creative edge that it gives those people. We tend not to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of look down our nose at this stuff, but we should be celebrating them. They're amazing. We're not doing that crap. I couldn't make. I remember I bought a 1950 Triumph Tiger that was like restored, but it was from Indonesia. This was 25 years ago, and it was like deeply suspicious, But I got it and it ran. It was a lovely bike, and then the magneto crapped out one day. And I was like really curious about it. I had another magneto, twin cylinder BTH magneto. I was just going to swap them out. So I pulled this mag off and I looked inside. It's like, oh my God, this is not a magneto. This is a spark impulse generator. It's kind of like what round case Ducati's 7 or 860s used. It's like, it's not a magneto. Basically, it has 2 ignition coils, but this little unit generates a spark impulse, right? That the coil amplifies. So it's this solid state electronic, basically kind of magneto. And someone had built this out of Radio Shack parts, basically, like some clever person. This was not a commercial unit. It was like someone had soldered this thing up and stuffed it in a magneto, because it was easier for them to do that than to try and rebuild a magneto. And I was astounded. I was like, wow, this worked. It stopped working, but I don't know how long ago they built this thing,
But it was like a cool little treasure you discovered, right?
Right? It was amazing.
Even though it didn't work, but I hope you saved that somewhere.
Yeah, it worked for hundreds of miles. And then when it finally crapped out, it was when I, just said, I'll just swap it up with another mag. It was like, people are amazing, and necessity is the mother of invention. And, how cool that this person had like a 1950s Triumph that they wanted to restore, but couldn't get parts for magneto. So it was easier to, like, I don't know, take apart a radio or something and make an impulse generator.
I love it. Yeah, I love them Triumph Tigers. So what a just sweet bike.
Such a pretty bike.
Now,
yeah.
I want to go back, talk about, obviously, before we get into talking about your books, I want to talk a little bit about that. But since you have this vast library, I got a question. If you were going to recommend maybe 5-10 books and say, hey, you know what? You want to start a small little library about motorcycle history. This is the 5 or 10 books you should have. What would you recommend? And you can include yours. I don't think that's ego-driven, because it's probably, should be on a shelf.
Well, I guess it depends on what you're interested in. So, if you're interested in cafe racers, you should really have my cafe racer books. I did one with Michael Lichter. That was my first book, actually, because we did 2 exhibitions at Sturgis together. And one of them became a book called Cafe Racers. And I wrote the text. And my newer one, Ton Up, is way more deeply researched. So, and it's a cool book. It's like all unpublished photographs going back to like the 1870s. It's pretty interesting. But I like, in terms of general interest, there are a few encyclopedias of the motorcycle. I think the most useful one to me is one that was done in the 70s, and it is called just the Encyclopedia of the Motorcycle, and it's by Helmut Krakowitzer. And you can find those used; they're pretty inexpensive. I love the Guggenheim catalog from the Art of the Motorcycle. That's a terrific book, although they're kind of spendy these days. I can't tell you who I heard it from, but I am friends with the 2 curators of that exhibit, Alton Guilfoyle and Charlie Falco. But I heard not from them that the Guggenheim had lost the hard discs that they had all those books on. So there will not be another reissues of those books. So if you've got them, hold on to them. Yeah, they screwed up. Somebody wiped the hard. Yeah, but those are really beautiful Those are beautiful books. I don't know, I think about books like Jupiter's Travels, if you're interested in like the romance of adventure. That's Ted Simon's book about riding a Triumph around the world in the 70s. Really great travel book. But gosh, there's just so many. There's great stuff that is coming out all the time. Like I say, are you interested in really old stuff or choppers or cafe racers or racing per se? There's just so many directions to go. And I was asked by the Automobile magazine in England to list my desert island books, and that was a very personal collection that included that encyclopedia of the motorcycle and the Guggenheim book and the Ted Simon book and a couple others. There's a beautiful book called The Vintage Years at Brooklands, which is just large format photographs from glass negatives of racing at Brooklands racetrack in England from 1920 to 1930. And it's so focused, but the bikes are so beautiful and the pictures are so beautiful. It's like one of my all-time favorites. I'm a big fan of photography. I'm a photographer, so if it has really good photography, that helps.
Yeah. I enjoy that, and I enjoy reading anything that's talks about the history. I like to know the story behind things.
Yeah.
That leads me into like your books. I mean, we kind of refer to them. So for people that aren't familiar with you and your, the books you've authored, why don't you tell everybody about those books?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have an Amazon author page. So if you go to Paul Dorleon's Amazon, you'll see everything that I've written or contributed to. There's a couple that are still coming out, but oh boy. Like I say, the first one was the Cafe Racers with Motor Books. I also did the Ton Up with Motor Books. I did the writing for a book of an Argentinian photographer that came out, I think, last year. Wrote the text for that. I've ghostwritten books for Jay Leno. I've also did The Chopper, The Real Story with Gestalten. I did a book called The Current, which is the first book about electric motorcycles with Gestalten. I did 2 editions of The Ride and The Ride Second Gear with Gestalten that had also Chris Hunter from Bike Exif wrote on those as well. So yeah, a bunch of stuff. And also my Custom Revolution book. I've got a couple books in my pocket still that have yet to be published. One's about overland motorcycling throughout history. And one's another book about electric motorcycle history, like a deep dive. Because I think I've documented just about every electric motorcycle ever commercially produced, and in the early years, through up until the 80s, like all these crazy stuff that nobody's ever really heard of that were produced in limited numbers. So one of my interests.
Speaking of electric motorcycles, I mean, I don't think people realize. I think the first patent was like the late 1860s or something for electric motorcycles, right?
Yeah, believe it or not, the first patent for a motorcycle was in about 1869, and it was not for a gas-powered motorcycle or a steam-powered motorcycle. It was electric. So that's pretty radical. I don't think it was built. So I think still the first motorcycles per se were steam-powered. There may have been one as early as 1817. We can't be certain, but there's like a lithograph of a guy riding a steam-powered motorcycle, like a bone shaker, from 1818. And it's kind of satirical, but I think someone actually built it. When you look at the illustration, it's like, no, this looks like this was a real thing. But the first one we actually know about and still exists is from 1867, the Sylvester Roper here in America, and then 1869 in France. And Anyway, but the first electric motorcycles we really know about was a trike. That was 1881. Then the first like proper two-wheelers were later in the 1880s. There were electric pacing cycles, actually, built by some several French manufacturers made them for pacing. And and then you start seeing like real electric motorcycles more in the 1910s. And they were always problematic because batteries don't have as big a punch as gasoline. So while electric cars were on par with steam-powered and gasoline-powered cars up until about the mid-1910s, they were sold in equal numbers. Wasn't the same with electric and steam motorcycles because steam, obviously you can usually get about 15 miles before you run out. You need to fill up with more water, and electric motorcycles are just too heavy and they don't pack enough punch.
That's what this term people don't realize right now when they say he's running out of steam. That's exactly what it's referring to.
Exactly. Yeah, I've written about the very first road race in America, which was 1896. It was the Chicago Sun-Times race for motorcycles, which was a blanket term that covered anything with the motor and wheels. And there were actually electric motorcycles, electric cars, steam cars, and Pennington had one of his crazy ass gasoline-powered motorcycles, and there was even like this bizarre fan-powered motorized bicycle. And so people were even trying back in the 1890s to build electric vehicles that worked, and cars were much more successful for sure because you can carry 1,000 pounds of batteries and it really doesn't matter. Same as a Tesla. The reason they work is because they got a lot of battery under there, and the motors are pretty light.
Well, I know electric motorcycles have been treated lukewarm. I personally love them. Doesn't mean I'm ready to give up the gas-powered bikes that I have. The experience is different. The power is tremendous. I mean, I was out in San Francisco a couple of years ago. I was meeting with the founder of Onyx. They got the little like mopeds. Yep. So we went to lunch right underneath the Bayview Bridge. There's a little burger place there. You're probably familiar with it. And the guy said, "Hey, we're just going to go ride around all day." And I mean, we were shooting up Pacific Heights on these things, and we were passing everybody.
Yep.
And I know people are like, "Well, what the hell is that?" As we were scooting past them, had all that torque, had all that power. And then I went out one day. Went out to Lightning. Was out there with folks at Lightning. Fascinating time because there's a certain person that owns Amazon that's invested in there, so they get some time on supercomputer. They're actually doing a couple of Jeff's vehicles, converting them to electric. But we went out. They had a little thing, they had a little bike I took out that's like a little Honda Grom, and then they had the new super bike.
Yeah.
But before we got out there, they were showing us what they were doing, a new swing arm that the computer designed. And I'll tell you, Paul, it looked like something that should have been dug up in Jurassic Park because it just looks like an alien life form. Yet here this thing was, it was a third of the weight of a regular swing arm, and it could bear 4 times more weight.
Yeah. I mean, here's the deal. Motorcyclists are incredibly conservative. This has been true forever. And in terms of the market, people buy what they know. And that's why, let's say, for example, the new Triumph or even the Lightning, they look like they have a gas tank. Why?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no gas in there. And it's just because people are familiar with that shape. I mean, Lightning is remarkable. I mean, Richard is, I tip my hat to Richard, for making the fastest production motorcycle in the world. Yep. I don't know how many he's actually produced, but 218 miles an hour. I think for the last 6 years, he's been able to hold that title. And I don't know why the president, any president, isn't shouting it from the rooftops. The fastest motorcycle in the world is made in America. That hasn't been true since about 1912.
Right.
So there's the tech aspect, but excuse me, in terms of what people are willing to accept, I think I tell my friends and people I know who manufacture electric bikes, it's like, don't expect the traditionalists to come on board, because they're not. And the ones that are aiming at non-motorcyclists are the ones that are doing the best, like Onyx or like Sondors or like Monday or all these, or even Cake. The ones that are aiming at people who've never ridden a motorcycle before, they're the ones that are selling like hotcakes.
Cake too. I mean, that's a piece of art too. I love what Cake has done with their stuff. Scandinavians, they're all over that modern art and just creating something that's aesthetically pleasing as well.
Yeah, I mean, and we live in the United States, which is a different scene than Europe. The Europeans, I mean, Norway is already 40% electric vehicles overall, just through legislation and through stimulus, rebates and things like that. It's actually cheaper to buy an electric car than a gas car there. And so people are just switching over wholesale. And, one day they'll probably just tax the hell out of gas cars. And so they'll only be used for fun occasionally, and maybe not even allowed to be used in the middle of cities. That's already true in China, and pretty soon it'll be true all over Europe. You just won't be able to use a gasoline powered car in the middle of a city. And you know what? I totally get it. If you ever walked around Paris or Rome in the summer and 800 freaking mopeds are revving their throttles at a stoplight and your eyes are burning, it's like, really? Do we need this? Right. Have just as much fun on an electric bike. And, does it matter? I don't know. I mean, I love my vintage motorcycles. I've done 4 Cannonballs, and, I'm about to go off for a week and ride my 65 Bonneville with my girlfriend on the back, through Central California back roads. I love them, and I always will love them, and there'll always be a place for them. But, we have to accept that there's another reality coming. And big bikes the big electric bikes, they're not there yet. I mean, they're fun for 100 miles.
No, they still, Zero and the rest of them, they still got their work cut out for them. But
yeah,
I think they're going to get it done.
Yeah, it's not their work; it's the work of the battery industry. It's just, they're not green. Electric bikes are not green. They are. No. Let's say they're like, and electric cars, they're getting the equivalent of 100 miles per gallon, which is great. We could do the same thing with a gasoline powered car. Could happen, wouldn't take that much work. What has to happen is, that you can't recycle a battery right now, which is absurd. It's like, extraction is an ugly business, whether it's oil or lithium or cobalt or any of the rare earth minerals that you need to produce an electric vehicle. Extraction is ugly. It impacts people's, physical location. It poisons the land.
Well, and you talk about batteries.
Yeah, the fact that batteries can't be recycled right now is insane to me. It's like,
it's the same with carbon fiber.
Yeah.
You've got the same problem. Truck bicycles. Okay, and there's a lot of people that are producing, carbon fiber bikes. I mean, I have a Trek Madone, okay, that I ride, but that thing cannot be recycled. And Trek is committed to finding a process for recycling this. Seems crazy that it even has to happen.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I'm sure they'll figure out something, grind them up or something like that. But it's well, one of my majors in college, besides art and politics and things, was environmental studies. And, there's this whole notion of life cycle manufacturing. It's like, and we're starting to, I mean, it's actually, it's actually coming up with various industries, including even guns. It's like, you are actually have to be responsible for what happens with your product once it goes out into the world. You can't just say, here, it's your problem. No, actually, you've made this thing you know, and actually like responsible manufacturing means you are responsible for making sure that this thing can be recycled or reused or something at the end, because you can't just keep dumping shit into the world. You know, we have to figure out we live in a finite planet, and I don't care what Elon Musk says, this is all we got, man. You can't live on the moon. You can't live on Mars. You know, it's like, we are of planet Earth. I mean, maybe you could take a mile square chunk of planet Earth and stick it on Mars, but nobody's talking about that. You know, it's like, we can't live without the bacteria and the microbes and everything that's here. There is no other place for us. So we need to take care of this place. You know, we need to figure out how we can live, how we can have something as fun as motorcycles in a responsible way. You know, it's like, I love motorcycles. I feel bad about my leaky British bikes. I look forward to the day that I can do, you know, have as much fun on something.
Well, you probably hit a few leaky American bikes along the way too. So
yeah, all that.
So tell me, I mean, I know what my first impressions were the first time I was on an electric bike. What was your first impressions?
Yeah, I mean, wow, what fun. Believe it or not, the first electric bike I rode was an electric trials bike. This was probably 15 or 20 years ago. A friend of mine up in Oregon had a big property, and he had a regular two-stroke trials bike, and he put me on this crazy plastic Japanese electric trials bike. I never even heard of the thing. I still don't even remember what the make was, and it was a blast. It was like, whoa, what is this? And it worked great, and you know, it made a little whirring noise, and you know, it's like, oh, that was interesting. And then, you know, much later, I had the opportunity to break the story on the Mission 1, which was the first electric sport bike back in 2009, built by a bunch of ex-Tesla employees. Elon has no interest in motorcycles, so they went off and did their own thing after he fired them in 2009 or 2008. And yeah, amazing. That was my first example of that kind of rush of 100% torque at 0 RPM. Man, that means something.
Yeah.
in the seat of the pants.
Absolutely. I know, like, you know, we're talking about lightning, and, you know, Richard, I would grow the Grom and come back, and he had that new sports bike they were getting ready put in production. And he's like, because there's only a few people I ever rode this. You want to ride? I'm like, yeah. And I went down, you know, he's there, you know, on the outskirts of San Jose, and I went out and did the loop that I did with the Grom, and I was on that backstretch because there's pretty much nothing on the other side there.
Yeah.
And I just took off, but I'm paying attention to the bike. I'm not paying attention to speedometer or anything else. And all of a sudden I start slowing down as I'm coming up to that stop sign really fast. And I look down, I'm just dropping under 90. I'm like, well, wait a minute.
Whoa. Yeah.
How did I, you know, how's that? So I just figured it was a hot lap. I waved to the guys, and I went and did a second one. Now I'm paying attention. And the fact that I got to the speed that I did so quickly,
yeah.
All right, with no noise, no vibration, nothing, just sheer speed and wind.
Yeah.
Pretty proud.
Yeah, someday, probably fairly soon, when solid state batteries are become a reality in about 2 years, they'll be expensive, but they'll work. And then you'll have let's say a Lightning that'll do 200 miles an hour that only weighs 400 pounds and will go for, you know, 300 miles, you know, and that, you know, I'm sorry, I don't really need to ride more than 300 miles in a day. You know, that's plenty enough for me. I don't care how fast you're going. That's plenty, you know. It's coming soon. So, but for the moment, you know, it's the smaller bikes that are going to lead the way, and they're a blast. You know, I love like the Monday and the Onyx and the Super 73 and the Zoos and all those little kind of, you know, they look like little Stingrays with motors. And, you know, I loved Stingray when I was a kid. I like it a lot better when it'll do 40 miles an hour.
Sure. Yeah, the 73s are nice. I actually bought a couple of scooters, electric scooters, off-road scooters. So grab those. I'm going to take them out to Sturgis so I could scoot around the Buffalo chip a little easier.
God, it's exactly what you need out at Sturgis. Take it on the sidewalk, Sorry, man, it's not a motorcycle.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to take it downtown, but Woody's got a pretty big campground out there at the
Yeah.
Buffalo show. So when
Yeah.
I'm hosting Chopper show and stuff like that, to go from one end to the other, it makes it a lot easier.
Exactly.
So, I'm kind of curious. You talk about the culture and everything else. You talk about builders. You talk about designers. Right now, some of the young guys. There's some really great young talent out there, and there's some great talent around the world.
Yeah.
Who stands out in your mind right now?
Whew. Gosh, I just a couple of weekends ago, I had the opportunity to set up a photo shoot with Max Hazen in LA with his. He just finished building this incredible Vincent, and the guy works alone in a fairly small shop in downtown LA. He doesn't have any CNC, and he makes these super tight, exquisite motorcycles. And the dude made his own carburetors. He made his own wheel rims, hubs, brakes. He made his own shocks. He made his own forks. Made his own. I don't know. I actually don't know any other builder that's doing everything. And you know what? They're all tidy and they're just gorgeous. And, he really stands out to me as an example of someone who has been pushing his own sort of his own aesthetic, his own skills, and this bike, this Vincent, just won Best in Show at the Quail Motorcycle Gathering. It was the first custom bike, I think, at a concours that had ever won Best in Show. And I was part of the judging team. I also MC the show, and I was back in the judging chambers. And I said, when we were talking about Best in Show, I said, you got to give it to this guy. He's the only person who's made his own carburetors here. And they're like, yeah, but it's a custom bike. And I'm like, okay, how old are you? And all the guys that objected were over 70 years old. I was like, this isn't free. This isn't about you, man. This is about all the 26-year-old kids that look at Bike Exif and look at all the chopper mags and everything. They're the ones who are our future. And this bike speaks to them. All these incredible restored bikes from the 30s, the 60s, the 80s, they're wonderful, and I love them dearly. But you know what? This is the future. This speaks to a new generation. So, yeah, I mean, I look at there's the guys Thrive in Indonesia. I love what they're doing.
Yep.
I mean, there're just so many. There's Kengo Kimura in Hiroshima. He has an outfit called Haiwa Motorcycles. They are so tight, like
some of the prettiest things on the planet.
Yeah, I mean,
the one red bike he did is just, oh my goodness! It's like looking into a beautiful red mirror almost. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah, and you know what, Brian Thompson here in California now, he's doing more like. He does these old school, mostly like 50s Triumph creations, and they look like it's kind of like these bands today are like the best new wave band you never heard or the best rockabilly band you never heard. His bikes are the best 1950s customs that were never made in the 50s. They're just impeccable. You gotta love them because they're like kind of perfect. They're not a resto mod or a retro mod. They just are perfect 1950s customs. Which I like too.
So yeah, I love all of it, and I love witnessing all of it. And I love the fact that Paul, you have established yourself for a lot of folks around the world. You're kind of our window in being able to see things in a broader scope. I would encourage people that anybody's watching this, really pick up some of Paul's stuff, his books. We haven't talked about the Vengeance, the other work that you do. I mean, how many articles have been written? How many, how much stuff's been produced there? Tell folks about that as well.
Yeah, I started thevintagent.com as a blog in 2006. And I revamped it completely in 2016 with a partner in New York. We're the ones who started the Motorcycle Arts Foundation together. And at this point, we've got, I don't know, almost 2,000 articles. And I think about 300 films, because we also have the largest motorcycle film database in the world. I helped produce a motorcycle film festival in New York for 3 years. And when that collapsed through various issues, I brought Corinna Mantlo, who started that festival, on as my curator for film on the Vintage Ent. So every week we have a new film. And so it's kind of really fun. So we've got the film aspect, and we've got the stories about vintage and history and contemporary custom and electric. Like, I have a vertical called The Current, which that book from Gestalten was named after. Yep. And that just follows what's happening right now in the electric scene. But we also write about, older electrics and kind of history and context, and interviews with designers. And there's so much interesting, so the Vintage Ent is very wide ranging. It's not about vintage anymore. The first time I wrote about electric motorcycles was 2009, and the first time I started writing about customs was right at the beginning in 2006. So it's always been about everything, even 80s, 90s sport bikes, 2000 sport bikes. I mean, whatever catches my fancy.
Yeah. And it's, so now how long you've been doing this? Since 2006, correct?
Yeah.
And
so 16 years.
So you have, I mean, you obviously, you say you've got lots of film, you got lots of stuff like that. What if somebody was a young author, or just an author in general, was doing some research? Would they be able to reach out to you and your people?
Oh yeah, I've got, I think if you look on our contributors page, we've got everybody from Jay Leno to, there's a 26-year-old guy from England, Harry Fryer, who's writing about kind of hacks on electric bikes, So
okay.
Huge range of people who've contributed to the Vintage Ent over the years. I think it's 100 at this point. And we have some regular contributors, and some who just pop up, once a year or something. And so, yeah, I'm super open, Paul@thevintageent.com. I'm super open to other people's ideas. You got a story you want to tell, you have a family member who had some crazy obscure bike that has a wild story, I'm all ears.
So I'm glad to hear that, and that's what I heard about you. And I knew that, but I wanted to bring that up because I wanted people to know that the Vintage Ent can get you, the info and stuff you need, and we'll work with you. So I think that's wonderful. Every show we ask our guests 3 questions.
Uh-oh.
All right, and they're all the same questions. So we're not gonna catch you with anything crazy or anything like that. But I think yours is going to probably be the most insightful answers of all. So I'm really looking forward to these answers. The first question is that you can go ride with anybody, past or present. Who would you like to go ride with?
Oh man, that's a great question. And do they have to be a motorcyclist? That's a
usually the answers lean that way, but you know what?
Yeah, you know what?
They can all be cyclists.
Yeah, there've been so many amazing motorcyclists throughout history. Probably George Bernard Shaw, the author and playwright. He was British. He was really good friends with T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. Yeah. He was friends with kings and princes, and he wrote amazing plays. Check out Arms and the Man. You can actually just read it as a text, but I don't know if it's been made into a film, but it's a great story about how young man is in love with a young woman. Young woman's father is an arms manufacturer, and he's a pacifist. I think he's a Quaker, and he has a real issue with this. And just the whole discussion about, the arms industry and the military industrial complex. And mind you, this was written in the 1930s, this whole question. Anyway, fascinating intellectual with a real heart, and very intriguing guy who was a motorcyclist in England in the 20s and 30s. And wouldn't it be interesting to hear what he was thinking about and what he saw and the conversations we had with the King of England in the 20s?
No kidding.
Lawrence of Arabia. And he was a friend of Churchill's. I like those people who knew everybody, who maybe weren't necessarily like don't get me wrong, this guy was incredibly famous in his day, but he wasn't T.E. Lawrence and he wasn't Winston Churchill.
No, but you're talking to the biggest figures of their time. I mean, very, very dynamic figures, but I know who he is and very familiar with them. So, but yeah, I can really appreciate that answer. Second question, this once again, I mean, this is something I can't wait to hear. If you could own any bike, what would it be?
I've had the good fortune of owning just about any bike I ever wanted, or riding any bike I ever wanted. I've ridden Crockers, I've ridden 4-cylinder Hendersons and Windhoffs, and Neanders, and just the wildest stuff I've been blessed to ride or own. Stuff from the teens and 20s. One bike I may never ride, and I probably, if I could, would be a Britain. This was a bike that was handmade in New Zealand. John Britton had an idea for a V-twin, a double overhead cam V-twin race bike, that was heavily carbon fiber, and it was completely radical. And, the sight of him taking this bike on Daytona and just walking away from the factory Ducatis in a race, what an incredible motorcycle. And they're radical looking and very 80s color schemes, bright pink and bright yellow and bright blue.
Sure.
And, but, talk about ingenuity. This guy was, he made this bike himself and took on the world and won. Sadly, he died, not before really the full measure of his success could be achieved. But, I have nothing but respect for that motorcycle and the man.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you for that. And then last, if you could go ride anywhere in the world, where would you like to ride?
Well, that's a little easier because there's actually a lot of places that I have not ridden there. And I can think of 2 roads in particular that I would love to take a motorcycle over. One is in Patagonia. I'd love to ride from Chile to Argentina over the Andes. And that's a 14,000 foot pass.
Yeah.
And the other one is also equally high altitude and in the mountains. It's the road from India to Ladakh, which is treacherous. It's one lane, it's gravel. There are buses, and there are 5,000 foot cliffs, and that just looks amazing to me. Actually, there's a third one in Vietnam that's supposed to be over the top, like in the mountains of northern Vietnam, just switchbacks as far as you can see in the jungle. It's supposed to be like outrageous. So those are all achievable.
What would you ride on that? What would be your bike of choice to ride on those sort of roads?
That's a great question. I would want to do it on a vintage bike, because I'm such a vintage lover. I could see doing it on anything from a Brough Superior to like a 60s Triumph or even a Velocette, bikes that I'm really familiar with and could fix on the side of the road. But I personally find tremendous satisfaction riding something really old and really beautiful in a crazy location, the high point of every cannonball for me was crossing the Rockies. And I rode a 1925 Brough Superior SS100 across, going to the Sun Road in Glacier National Park. And that was just like one of these other roads I mentioned, going through high mountain pass, I think it passes 10,000 feet, you know, on something that beautiful and that old, and just, I don't know, it's just magic combination, right? It's like cooking with your life. It's like throw in some extraordinary ingredients and see what comes out. And it's always been over the top for me, like amazing. That was like a peak experience in my life. And then doing an engines off run down, when you hit the peak at going to the Sun Road, it's downhill for 26 miles. And I just shut the engine off on that SS100 and rode it like a bicycle down. Was passing all these people on their bikes with their engines running because I was hauling ass, and kind of pissed off.
So how many miles did you go?
The whole way. The whole way. I've also done the you know.
Well, I know you went the whole way, but coming down, how far did you get to go? Just coasting.
Coasting, yeah, 26 miles. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't catch that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's about the same distance. You can do the same in Death Valley. I've done a bunch of Death Valley vintage rides, and I rode one of Dale Waxler's WR Harleys, a race bike, down what is it, from Zabriskie Point down to the hot springs down there where the motels are, and I think that's like the same, about 26 miles. And boy, was my neck hurting at the end because I crouched down on the tank, like peering up. But that was fun. I made the whole way too. I made it all the way back to the motel.
That's awesome. I love it. I absolutely love it. You know, it's kind of interesting because I know different artists, and don't hold me to it. I think like Van Gogh, you know, he had particular brushes he liked to paint with. And he felt like, you know, by painting these, I could make, with these brushes enabled him to make great paintings. I believe he could have made great painting regardless.
Yeah.
You're kind of the same way with the rides. Okay. You could do the ride regardless, just maybe as he could have with the paintbrush. But you know what? That paintbrush for him made it that much better. And the bike for you makes it that much better. I love it.
That's true. That's a great analogy. I mean, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I will literally ride anything and have ridden everything. I just know what really turns me on is something beautiful. I'm an artist, so the bikes I'm most attracted to, I think, are the most beautiful. So that's what attracted to me about, let's say, early Velocets or rough Superiors or Sunbeams, or, you know, just thought they were exquisite pieces of industrial design. And the fact that you can, you know, ride one across the country or do 100 miles an hour on one, it's like, really amazing, you know. And they're imperfect, but, you know, therein lies the charm. You know, their imperfection is part of the charm. It's kind of magic. And, you know, I don't think I'd be as forgiving. I've collected vintage cars too. I used to have like a 61 E-type convertible and all sorts of stuff. And I've driven some 1930s sports cars and stuff that friends have owned. And, you know, they're a real pain in the ass. They feel really dangerous. But a 1930s bike is like, it's a motorcycle. It's a motorcycle. You know, it's not that the brakes aren't as good, but otherwise it's like the physics of it are far more straightforward than a car. 1930s cars wander all over the place. Their steering is imprecise. The caster wasn't as figured out, and they're shifting patterns. Their shifting is weird, and it's like, but a motorcycle's like you get on and you go, and they're all the same. You know, it's amazing.
Doing a 62 Daimler right now, and yeah, it's it's some work, but we'll get there. You know, the Lancaster Daimler Club, you know, is a lot of help.
Yeah. Which one is it? A Jaguar Daimler or a Edward Turner Daimler?
Edward Turner.
Oh, an SB2. What is it? SB250?
SB250.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got that. You know, that car was supposed to be called the Dart, and Dodge found out, they paid them off, so they went and introduced it as the Dart, and they were putting that 2.5 liter V8 Hemi in it, and awesome. So they called it the SP250, and that's what stuck. But the 62 is probably the best of the years, because the early ones, you talk about that gearbox and lousy steering, it was not good.
Yeah.
So it took some time for them to perfect that, but a fun car, sounds good, and we'll have her ready for some some nice shows here in the future.
Well, you talk about like all-time great motorcycle designers, Edward Turner, who designed that car, and all triumphs from about 1938 to about 1965, when he retired, produced some of the most beautiful motorcycles in the world. Yep. Edward Turner, George Brough, I'm trying to think of a few others. The Goodmans from Velocet, produced some of the most beautiful motorcycles in the world, and they're kind of unsung, geniuses who just made these universally appealing design objects, that on which you can travel through space at illegal speeds even today. Yes. I mean, you can't do that with a Rembrandt, or a Van Gogh.
No, you can't. I love that.
That's what I always say. It's like, you can't ride a Rembrandt, you can put as much money as you want into a work of art, but riding a motorcycle is a qualitatively different experience. It's unrepeatable.
It absolutely is. Well, sir, this has been a pleasure, and I think, I think there's so much more information, that we could cover, stories and everything else. So maybe somewhere down the future, if you've got, something big that's going on, we can bring you back on here and let the folks hear a few more stories and get a little bit more insight from you.
Always fun. Yeah, I'm always doing new exhibitions in advance. And, I've done 5 at the Peterson, and we're looking to do one more soon, which is not quite finalized yet. And we're looking to do something at Art Basel this year, and lots of stuff going on. We got so much going on. My head reels at times, but I'd love to come back and talk to you about it.
Yeah, let's revisit some of these things in the future. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Yeah, take care. Thanks, Mario.